Hello, people of the internet. We're gonna do this right. I moved to LA in January of 2020, so right before COVID hit. I moved there, or here, from New York City. I lived there for about 2 years. Before that, I was at the University of Michigan, and before that, I was in New Jersey. For as long as I can remember, I always wanted to move to LA. I moved to New York after school because that's where I found a job, and I was pretty happy to move there as well because I love the big city. Growing up in New Jersey, you kind of love New York City, or you hate it, but I loved it. But I hated the cold. So it's kind of funny that I actually ended up at the University of Michigan, considering I chose to go there, and it was very cold. But I knew going to school in Michigan would be temporary, and eventually I could go to LA. Even before I ever visited, I knew that the combination of mountains and ocean and a little bit of a city was exactly what I wanted. And there's a downtown with energy and people and something happening every day. I crave that, and I love that. I love bangs too. I loved living in New York as well. The energy there is just uncomparable. I still miss that energy being in LA, but the cost of living there was so soul-crushing. Literally half of my paycheck was going to rent, and it was the tiniest apartment ever with no amenities. I lived on the 6th floor with no elevator. The metro was like $130 a month. Ubers were super expensive. Just everything that you could imagine was way more expensive there. As I'm sure you're aware, everybody always talks about the cost of New York. But that really hit hard for me when I was really upset in the wintertime. I really questioned, why am I living in a place that I hate being in for half of the year? In January, February, March, you simultaneously don't want to leave the apartment or work because it is so cold outside, but your apartment is too small, at least in my situation. So you don't want to hang out in your apartment either. I made the most of every month I possibly could, but it really did upset me how much I was paying to be in a place that was making me very upset in the winter. So in 2019, during that winter, I kind of decided that would be it. January 2020, I am moving to LA. The thought was that I would avoid having to come back for the holidays if I left in January, but I would also avoid the worst of winter, which is the winter month without the holidays, because Christmas time in New York is actually magical, so I can't complain about that. But wintertime in New York with no holiday spirit is tragic. You get the point. It was really difficult. Your outfit is the same every day. You have to really love your winter coat and winter boots because you're going to be wearing them every single day for 3 months straight. So weather was a huge factor. So many people warned me before moving to LA, the traffic is so horrible, you're gonna need a car. But I knew I was moving to downtown LA because that's where my office was. So I felt like I could make it work. I would just walk to work every day, and if I really needed to get around, I could Uber or use the public transportation. I was just determined not to have a car. So you're probably getting sick of my explanation, so I'll get straight to the point. I wanted to make this move across the country as cheap as possible. My savings, or lack thereof, was dwindling to nothing because of the cost of living in New York, and because I knew I was leaving New York, so I was kind of living it up before I left. So to make the trip as cheap as possible, I wasn't going to ship anything. I was just going to rent a car, drive across the country as quickly as possible, and bring whatever I could fit. Anything else was getting left in New Jersey. But my boyfriend had the great idea to see if there was anyone who needed their car driven across the country. And this reminded me that I had a friend whose family had paid people previously to drive their car across the country when they had moved. I did think this was kind of feasible, but I was definitely skeptical because I had a certain timeline, I had certain locations, and so I didn't put all my eggs into that basket until we found the greatest man on planet Earth. I won't say his name, but he is a cabinet maker in San Diego, and he needed his huge box truck. Well, it wasn't ginormous, but it was pretty large for my standards. I'll show a picture. He needed this huge box truck driven from Perth Amboy, New Jersey to San Diego, California. My family lived in East Brunswick, New Jersey, and that is where my starting point would be because I was moving out of New York, bringing it all to New Jersey, and then moving from there. Perth Amboy happened to be 15 minutes away from my house, so that was a perfect starting location. And then San Diego, not so far from LA, we would drop off my stuff at LA and continue on our way. And the agreement was that he would pay for all the truck expenses like gas, tolls, if there was any, parking, if that was an issue, and whatever else came up. And he gave us $400 to go towards our hotels during our cross-country road trip because we weren't gonna sleep in the truck. So I thought this was way too good to be true. Sounds unbelievable. I get to move across the country for free, so much so that someone is paying for my hotels and gas. So we just had to pay for food, which is why I count this as free, because I'd have to pay for food no matter where I was in life, so whatever. We found this truck through a website called myfamilytravels.com. I don't exactly know how it works because I didn't do the posting or searching. Thankfully, Carson, my boyfriend, had taken care of that because he was the one determined to do this. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory if you go to the site, and I'll link it below. So it was a little too good to be true. It started off pretty great. We got the truck. We had so much room in the truck that anything I thought I was gonna have to leave behind easily came with us. There was so much room. I think we filled up like a fifth of the room in that truck, so I was actually worried about everything shifting around, but it was totally fine. I don't think anything was damaged. There was a bit of a learning curve for Carson, who was driving the truck. I would not have trusted myself to drive that truck. He drives a big van around usually, so he felt comfortable driving large vehicles. This was definitely much larger than anything he had ever driven in his life, and all of a sudden he was on major highways with this new experience, so it was a bit stressful for him, for sure, at the beginning. And the first night we wanted to stop in DC to see some museums, so we had to pay $80 for parking. Luckily, our best friend in San Diego covered that expense, but it was definitely something to consider. Where the heck would we park this large vehicle? We have no experience with parking anything like this. So it was going pretty well. And then we started driving to Nashville. And I don't know if it was a check engine light or what, but some sort of signal came up and there was some weird noise, and then the car just stopped moving. It just like went to zero as soon as possible, and we were on the highway. And we were freaking out because we were literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest town was 15 minutes away, and we knew this because we eventually had to Uber there. But basically, we had to abandon the truck in the middle of nowhere. We asked some strangers that we saw if we could leave it in this parking lot, and then we Ubered to the nearest town. Unfortunately, the next day was Sunday, so when we towed the truck to the repair shop, they said they couldn't do anything till the next day. So we were in Cookeville, Tennessee, I think for like 5 days, because once they said they could repair it, it took a few days for them to do whatever. I'm not going to pretend I know what they did or any of those details. So we thought we'd spend one day in Nashville, Tennessee, and we ended up spending 5 days in Cookeville. And we went to Cracker Barrel and Waffle House and bowling, and we felt this change in culture in our stomachs from all the grease we were eating. But then we got out of there when they told us that it was fixed. So we headed on our way to Nashville, and then it broke down again. Now I'm trying to remember if it broke down 3 times or how many times it broke down. I know we went to at least 3 repair shops. But anyway, it definitely broke down at least once more. And that's when they really figured out what was going on and said, there is no way that you're going to get to LA by Monday, which was my timeline because I needed to go to work on Monday. So then things became very stressful. Luckily, our best friend in San Diego said that he would rent a minivan for us so I can continue my journey to LA. So we packed up the minivan with as much as we could, but we had to leave some big bulky furniture items in the truck, and I just had to cross my fingers and hope that I'd see them again one day. The plan was for San Diego man to have his friend drive back to Memphis, Tennessee to pick up the truck and drive it the rest of the way with all my stuff. But, you know, you never know what's going to happen once you say goodbye to your stuff halfway across the country. So I was a little nervous, hesitant, but luckily that all worked out. So we took the minivan all the way to LA. Our trip was definitely truncated. We only got to stop in a couple of the places that we originally intended to. Maybe I'll do a separate video about what I would recommend seeing if you're gonna go across the country, because there were definitely some stops that I would recommend. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Yeah, so that did not go as expected. I don't know what the takeaway is, because on one hand, it was still very cheap. We only ended up paying maybe like $300 towards our own food and a couple of the hotel prices that spilled over. $300 for the week between two people. Pretty good deal. I really thought I was going to be paying at least $2,000 to be moving across the country, so just a couple hundred feels like for free. Feels like this title is justified. Oh, anyway, so back to the takeaways. Like, on one hand, I paid very little money, but then there was this crazy experience with the truck. But I don't think that's gonna happen to you if you take someone else's car across the country, because it's not like San Diego man did this on purpose. He was the one who had to pay for all the repairs and his friend flying out and all the drama, the rental car. So this was very unexpected. He was super nice. Like, I can't believe we lucked out so much. So I would recommend, what's it called? I would recommend myfamilytravels.com. Not sponsored, but you know, just be mindful. You know, you never know. You never know. The craziest story. Every day I was giving my family updates and they just could not believe the words coming out of my mouth. And to this day when I tell this story, I'm just like, yeah, I cannot believe that happened either. How did we survive? So takeaways and tips for moving across the country, New York to LA. Some people try to save up a certain amount of money before they move to a big city, but I was already in a big city that was more expensive, so I didn't feel like I had to save up a certain amount. If anything, I had to get out of there ASAP because I knew that I would be saving money as soon as I left, and this was true. I moved here with the intention of living by myself because there were literally apartments that I could have to myself with living rooms and blah for the same price that I was paying in New York. But they weren't fantastic apartments and I was still struggling to find a perfect fit for me. That's when some coworkers and my boss kind of suggested, you know, maybe you should consider some roommates. You would be able to afford much nicer buildings. And they were totally right. I used the Facebook group LA Housing, LA Roommate Search, I'm pretty sure it's LA Housing, to find a roommate. And she had an apartment building all set up to go. She was just trying to find the right people to live with her. And I was gonna have my own room, brand new building, in-unit washer and dryer, pool, hot tub, rooftop deck, security, the whole 9 yards. They're called luxury apartment buildings and there's a ton of them in downtown LA. And so with roommates, these ended up being super cheap. Like, I paid $818 to live in the nicest building that I had ever lived in. So when people say LA is expensive, yeah, maybe, but not as expensive as New York. There was some roommate drama at that place. I have since moved. That roommate drama is still not resolved, and I don't want to talk about it. But I have other roommates from that group, and they're wonderful. I would still recommend that group if you are looking to move to LA and you are very interested in paying so little for such a nice place. I don't really know the situation in other neighborhoods of LA because I always knew I was going to be downtown, so I'm not sure what the luxury apartment building scene looks like, and you'll probably need a car if you live anywhere else, but I'm very happy that I moved. And even though it was a wild journey to get here, I'm so glad we used that website to find the free truck, and I would recommend that to anyone to at least try because you never know. Alright. Woo! I guess I'm really nervous. Alright, if you have any questions about moving across the country or about moving to LA, details of that story, leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to laugh at myself with you. Alright, bye. No, seriously. What the heck? Now I'm gonna have to... I hope I don't need to dry clean this thing. Goodbye.